Hello. In this video, I read out the Japanese folktales in English. I would be happy if you could press the channel subscription and thumbs up now. Let's begin. So, everyone, do you know what this vague white thing is, that some say is a river, that others say is the traces of milk? The teacher asked, pointing to a large black chart of constellations hanging on the blackboard, where a smoky white band of the galaxy stretched from top to bottom. Campanella raised his hand. Then 4 or 5 others raised their hands. Giovanni was about to raise his hand as well, but quickly stopped. He had read in a magazine some time ago that those were all stars, but these days Giovanni feels like he's falling asleep in class every day, and he doesn't have the time or books to read. So he feels like he doesn't really understand anything. But the teacher had already found out. Giovanni, you know, don't you? Giovanni stood up briskly, but once he stood up he could no longer give a clear answer. Zanelli turned around from his seat at the front, and chuckled at Giovanni. Giovanni was so embarrassed that he turned red. The teacher asked again, if you look closely at a galaxy with a big telescope, what do you think it is? Giovanni thought it was stars, but once again, he couldn't answer right away. The teacher seemed stumped for a while, but then he turned his eyes to Campanella and called out, Campanella. Campanella had raised his hand so enthusiastically, but he stood up fidgetily and still couldn't answer. The teacher looked surprised and stared at Campanella for a while, but then he quickly said, okay then, and pointed to the star chart himself. When you look at this faint white galaxy with a big, good telescope, it looks like many small stars. Don't you think so, Giovanni? Giovanni turned red and nodded. But one day, Giovanni's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I knew it, and of course Campanella knew it too. It was in a magazine that Campanella and I had read together at Campanella's father's doctor's house. Nowhere in particular, as soon as Campanella read the magazine, he brought out a huge book from his father's study, opened it to the section on the Milky Way, and the two of them looked at the beautiful picture, with white dots covering the pitch black pages, for ages. There was no way Campanella would forget it, but the reason he didn't reply right away was because lately I've been working hard, both in the mornings and afternoons, and when I go to school I no longer play cheerfully with the others, and I don't say much to Campanella either, so Campanella knew this and was feeling bad about it, and deliberately didn't reply. When I thought about it like that, I couldn't bear to feel sorry for both myself and Campanella. The teacher said again, so if you think of the Milky Way as really a river, each of those tiny stars corresponds to a grain of sand or gravel in the river. If you think of it as a giant flow of milk, it is even more similar to the Milky Way. In other words, all of those stars correspond to tiny globules of oil floating in the milk. So what corresponds to the water in the river? It is the vacuum that transmits light at a certain speed, and the sun and earth also float in it. In other words, we also live in the water of the Milky Way. And if you look in all directions from within the water of the Milky Way, just as the deeper the water, the bluer it appears. The deeper and farther away you are in the bottom of the Milky Way, the more stars you will see, and therefore it will look white and fuzzy. Look at this model. The teacher pointed to a large double-sided convex lens with many shiny grains of sand inside. The shape of the Milky Way is just like this. We think that each and every shining particle is a star that shines on its own, just like our sun. We imagine that our sun is roughly in the middle and the Earth is very close to it. Imagine that you stand in the middle at night and look around. Inside this lens, the lens is thinner on this side, so you can only see a few shining particles, or stars. The glass is thicker on this side and this side, so you can see many shining particles, or stars, and the distant ones look faintly white. This is the theory of the galaxy today. But since it's getting late, we will talk about how big this lens is and the various stars inside it in the next science class. Today is a festival of the galaxy, so everyone, go outside and take a good look at the sky. That's all for now. Put away your books and notebooks. Then, for a while, the classroom was filled with the sounds of desks being opened and closed and books being stacked, but soon everyone stood up, properly, bowed, and left the classroom. When Giovanni left the school gates, 7 or 8 of his classmates had not gone home but were gathered around the cherry tree in the corner of the schoolyard, with Campanella in the middle. They seemed to be discussing going to retrieve crow gourds to make blue lights to float down the river for tonight's star festival. But Giovanni came storming out the school gates, waving his hands widely. In the houses of the town, people were hanging leaf balls, lighting cypress branches, and preparing various things for tonight's Milky Way festival. Instead of going home, Giovanni turned 3 ways and went into a large printing press 3 turns down the street, and after taking off his shoes, he opened the large door at the end of the street. Inside, the lights were on even though it was still daytime, and many rotary presses were banging away, and many people with their heads tied with cloth or wearing lampshades were working away, reading and counting as if they were singing. Giovanni immediately went up to the man sitting at the 3rd tall table from the entrance and bowed. After searching the shelves for a while, the man handed him a piece of paper, saying, "Can you pick up this much?" Giovanni took a small, flat box from the foot of the man's table and squatted down in a corner of the wall that was leaning against the wall and had many electric lights on it. He used small tweezers to pick up one type after another, each as small as a millet grain. A man wearing a blue bib passed behind Giovanni and said, "Hey, insect glasses Kuhn, good morning." 4 or 5 people nearby laughed coldly, without making a sound or turning to look at him. Giovanni wiped his eyes several times as he picked up the type. Shortly after the clock struck 6, Giovanni once again compared the flat box full of type he had found with the piece of paper he was holding, and brought it to the person at the table. The person silently accepted it and nodded slightly. Giovanni bowed, opened the door, and came to the counter. The man in white clothing, again without saying a word, handed Giovanni a small silver coin. Giovanni's face suddenly brightened, he bowed vigorously, and ran out the front, picking up his bag that he had placed under the counter. Then, whistling enthusiastically, he stopped by a bakery, bought a loaf of bread and a bag of sugar, and ran off as fast as he could. Giovanni returned briskly to a small house in a back alley. On the leftmost side of the 3 entrances, purple kale and asparagus were planted in an empty box, and the 2 small windows had their shades drawn. "Mother, I've just come home. Are you feeling well?" Giovanni said as he took off his shoes. "Oh, Giovanni, you must have been working hard. It's cool today. I've been feeling fine." As Giovanni went up the front door, he found his mother sleeping in the room just inside, covered with a white cloth. Giovanni opened the window. "Mom, I bought some sugar cubes today. I wanted to put them in your milk." "Oh, you go first. I don't want any yet." "Mom, when did your sister come home?" Quote, "Oh, she came back around 3 o'clock. Everyone else took care of things. I wonder if Mom's milk has arrived yet? Maybe it hasn't. I'll go and get it." "Oh, I can." Take my time, so you go first. My sister made something with tomatoes and left it over there. Then I'll eat. Giovanni picked up a plate of tomatoes from the window and munched on them with bread for a while. Hey, Mom. I'm sure Dad will be back soon. Yeah, I think so too. But why do you think so? Because this morning's paper said that fishing in the north has been very good this year. Yeah, but, you know, Dad might not be out fishing. He's probably out. He couldn't have done anything so bad that he'd be sent to prison. The giant crab shells and reindeer horns that Dad brought back the other day and donated to the school are still in the specimen room. When the 6th graders were in class, the teachers would take turns bringing them into the classroom. I'll go to the camp. Dad said he'd bring you a sea otter jacket next time. Everyone says that when they meet me. They say it to tease me. They say bad things about you. Yeah, but they never say that about Campanella. Campanella looks annoyed when people say things like that. Apparently Campanella's dad and my dad have been friends since they were little, just like you two. Yeah, so my dad took me to Campanella's house. Those were good times. I was at school. On my way home from work, I often stopped by Campanella's house. At Campanella's house there was a train that ran on alcohol lamps. It was made up of 7 rails joined together to form a round shape, and it also had electric poles and signal signs, and the lights of the signal signs turned blue only when a train was passing. One day when we ran out of alcohol and used oil, the cans became completely sooted. Really? I still go and deliver the newspapers every morning. But the whole house is always quiet. It's early, isn't it? We have a dog called Sour. His tail is just like a broom. When I go there he runs around his nose. He follows me, chirping. He follows me all the way to the corner of the street. Sometimes he follows me even further. Tonight, everyone is going to let the crow's lanterns float down the river. I'm sure the dog will follow me too. That's right. Tonight is the Milky Way Festival. Yes. I'll go and watch it while I get my milk. Go ahead. Don't go in the river. I'm just going to watch it from the bank. I'll be back in an hour. Go play some more. You won't have to worry if you're with Campanella. I'm sure. We'll be together. Mother, shall we close the window? Yes, please. It's cool now. Giovanni stood up and closed the window, put away the plates and bread bags, put on his shoes briskly, and left the dark doorway saying, I'll be back in an hour and a half. Giovanni, whistle-like and lonely sounding, came down the hill in town lined with pitch-black cypress trees. At the bottom of the hill stood a large street lamp, glowing magnificently with a pale blue light. As Giovanni walked further and further down towards the light, his shadow, which had been trailing behind him, like a ghost, gradually grew darker and darker, and he came round to Giovanni's side, raising his legs and waving his hands. I'm a fine locomotive. Here, it's a slope, so I'll be going fast. I'm about to pass the light. Yes, this time my shadow is a compass. He turned around like that and came to the front, Giovanni thought, and strode past under the streetlight. Suddenly, in the middle of the day, Zanelli, wearing a new shirt with a pointed collar, came out of the dark alley on the other side of the light, and passed Giovanni in a flash. Zanelli, I'm going to go to the Crow Run. Before Giovanni had even finished saying it, the boy shouted from behind him, as if throwing his sea otter jacket. Giovanni's heart suddenly became heavy, and he felt as if he heard a ringing sound all around. What is it, Zanelli? Giovanni called back loudly, but Zanelli had already gone inside the house with the cypress tree on the other side. Why does Zanelli say such things when I haven't done anything? He runs like a mouse. It's because Zanelli is stupid that he says such things when I haven't done anything. Giovanni, thinking about various things. Passed through the town, which was beautifully decorated with various lights and tree branches. The clockmaker's shop was lit up with bright neon lights, and every second the red eyes of an owl made of stone spun around. And various jewels were placed on a thick glass plate the color of the sea, slowly rotating like stars, and from the other side a copper horse and rider slowly came around towards us. In the middle of it all was a round black constellation chart, decorated with blue asparagus leaves. Giovanni was completely absorbed in gazing at the chart of the constellations. It was much smaller than the chart he had seen at school that day, but when he turned the wheel to match the day and time, the sky that was visible at that time would revolve around the oval. And in the middle of it all, the Milky Way appeared as a hazy, smoky band stretching from top to bottom, and below that, it looked like a faint explosion or steam rising. Behind it stood a small, three-legged telescope shining yellow, and on the very back wall was a large chart with the constellations of the sky drawn in the shapes of strange beasts, snakes, fish, and bottles. I wondered if the sky was really filled with scorpions and warriors like that, and wished he could walk forever through it. And stood there for a while, lost in thought. Then, suddenly remembering his mother's milk, Giovanni left the shop, and, minding the shoulders of his tight jacket, he puffed out his chest and waved his hands as he passed through the town. The air was crystal clear, flowing through the streets and shops like water. The street lamps were all wrapped in bright green fir and oak branches, and the 6 plane trees in front of the electric company had lots of miniature lights inside, and the place really looked like a mermaid city. The children, all in their newly folded kimonos, whistled about the stars, ran around shouting, "Centaur, let the dew fall," and lit blue magnesia fireworks, and seemed to be having fun. But Giovanni, one day he would bow his head deeply again, and hurry towards the milkman, thinking of something completely different from the hustle and bustle around him. One day, Giovanni came to a place on the outskirts of town where many poplar trees stood high in the starry sky. He entered the black gate of the milkman's house and stood in front of the faintly lit kitchen that smelled of cows. He took off his hat and said, "Good evening." The house was quiet, and there seemed to be no one there. "Good evening, I'm sorry." Giovanni stood up straight and shouted again. After a while, an old woman came out slowly, looking unwell, and asked if she needed something. "Well, my milk didn't come to me today, so I came up to get some," Giovanni said as hard as he could. "There's no one here right now, so I don't know. Please do it tomorrow." The woman looked down at Giovanni and said, rubbing the area under her red eyes, "My mother is sick, so tonight is a bad time. Then please come back a little later." The man looked as if he was about to leave. "I see. Thank you then." Giovanni bowed and left the kitchen. As he was about to turn the corner of the street at a crossroads, he saw a jumble of black shadows and vaguely white shirts in front of a general store on the other side of the bridge, 6 or 7 students, whistling and laughing, each carrying a gourd light. Their laughter and whistling were all familiar to him. They were Giovanni's classmates. Giovanni was startled and tried to go back, but then he changed his mind and walked in that direction even more vigorously. "We're going to the river," Giovanni tried to say, but just as he felt his throat choke up, "Giovanni, the sea otter jacket is coming," Zanelli called out again. "Giovanni, the sea otter jacket is coming," the others quickly joined in. Giovanni turned bright red, not knowing if he was still walking, and tried to hurry past, but he saw Campanella among them. Campanella looked annoyed, and silently laughed a little, looking at Giovanni as if wondering if he would get angry. Giovanni avoided his eyes, and shortly after Campanella's tall form had passed, everyone started whistling. As he turned the corner, he looked back, and Zanelli was also looking back at him. And Campanella, too, walked off toward the vaguely visible bridge, whistling loudly. Giovanni, feeling indescribably lonely, suddenly began to run. Then some small children, hopping around on one foot and holding their hands over their ears, started to yell, thinking that Giovanni was running for fun. Soon Giovanni started running and hurried toward the Black Hills. Behind the pasture there was a gentle hill, and its black, flat peaks, faintly lower than usual, could be seen lined up beneath the Great Bear in the north. Giovanni climbed steadily up the small forest path, already covered with dew. Between the pitch-black grass and thickets of various shapes, the small path was lit up by a single white line of starlight. There were small insects in the grass that were emitting a bright blue light, and some of the leaves were shining blue, which Giovanni thought looked like the crow's gourd lights that the others had brought earlier. As he passed through the pitch-black forest of pine and oak trees, the sky suddenly opened up and he could see the Milky Way stretching from south to north, and he could also make out the weather wheel pillar at the top. Flowers such as jasmine and wild daisies were blooming all over the place, as if they had begun to smell from a dream, and a single bird passed by, singing above the hill. Giovanni came under the weather wheel pillar at the top, and threw his thudding body onto the cold grass. The lights of the town shone in the darkness like a palace at the bottom of the sea, and the sound of children singing, whistling, and broken cries could be heard. The wind blew in the distance, and the grass on the hill rustled gently, cooling Giovanni's sweat-soaked shirt. The sound of a train came from the fields. A row of small red windows appeared in the small train, and inside, many travelers were peeling apples, laughing, and thinking of all sorts of things. Giovanni felt an indescribable sadness and looked away again. 5 pages of manuscript missing during this time. However, no matter how much he looked, the sky did not seem like the desolate, cold place that Hiru-sensei had described. On the contrary, the more he looked, the more he could not help but imagine it as a field with small forests, pastures, and so on. Then Giovanni saw the blue lyre stars, flickering back and forth, and their legs extending and retracting many times, until they finally grew long like a taro. Then he thought the city just below looked like a vague collection of stars or one big cloud of smoke. Then Giovanni saw the weather wheel pillar right behind him suddenly take on the shape of a vague triangular sign, and for a while it flickered on and off like a firefly. It gradually became clearer, and finally stopped moving, and stood tall in a field of deep steel blue sky. He stood tall and upright in a field of sky that looked like a newly heated blue steel plate. Then, somewhere, he heard a strange voice say, "Galaxy Station. Galaxy Station," and suddenly the world before his eyes became bright, as if the fires of a billion firefly squids had been fossilized in one go and sunk into the sky, or as if a diamond company had suddenly turned over and scattered the diamonds that they had hidden away, pretending not to have been harvested so that the price would not go down. The world suddenly became bright, and Giovanni involuntarily rubbed his eyes several times. When he came to his senses, he realized that the small train he was riding in had been continuing to run, rumbling, since before. Giovanni was really sitting in a car lined with small yellow lights on a light railway at night, looking out the window. Inside the carriage, the blue velvet seats were practically empty, while 2 large brass buttons gleamed on the gray, varnished wall beyond. He noticed a tall child in a wet, pitch-black jacket leaning his head out the window in the seat directly in front of him. He had a feeling that he'd seen the child's shoulders somewhere before, and just as he thought this, he desperately wanted to know who it was. Just as he was about to stick his head out the window, the child suddenly pulled his head back and looked his way. It was Campanella. Giovanni was about to say, "Campanella, have you been here for a while?" But Campanella said, "Everyone ran a long way, but they were late." Zanelli ran a long way too, but he couldn't catch up. Giovanni thought, "That's right, we've just invited each other out," and asked, "Shall we wait somewhere?" Then Campanella replied, "Zanelli has already gone home. His father has come to pick him up. For some reason," as he said this, Campanella's face turned pale and he looked somewhat distressed. Giovanni also had a strange feeling, as if he had forgotten something somewhere, and went quiet. However, Campanella, looking out the window, had completely recovered, and said enthusiastically, "Oh no. I've forgotten my water bottle. And my sketchbook. But it doesn't matter. We're almost at the swan station. I really like to see swans. Even if they're flying far out over the river, I'm sure I can see them." Then Campanella kept turning the round, slab-like map around and around. In it, a single railroad track ran south along the left bank of the Milky Way, which was depicted in white. And what was so beautiful about the map was that, on a board as black as night, each station, triangular sign, spring, and forest was dotted with beautiful lights of blue, orange, and green. Giovanni felt like he had seen the map somewhere before. "Where did you buy this map?" "It's made of obsidian," Giovanni said. "I got it at the Galaxy station." "You didn't get one either." "Oh, I think I passed the Galaxy station. This is where we are now, right?" Giovanni pointed just north of the station sign that said, "Swan." "That's right." "Oh, is it a moonlit night on that riverbank?" Looking that way, the bank of the pale white Milky Way was covered with silver sky. Pampas grass, swaying and moving in the wind, making waves. "It's not a moonlit night. It's shining because it's a Milky Way," said Giovanni, feeling so happy he wanted to jump up and down. He tapped his feet, and stuck his head out the window. Whistling high and high on the stars, he tried his best to rise up and make out the waters of the Milky Way, but at first he just couldn't make it out. But as he looked more closely, he saw that the clear water, more transparent than glass or hydrogen, occasionally flickering purple waves as if it were his eyes, and shining brightly like a rainbow, flowed silently and steadily, and here and there in the field, beautifully standing, were phosphorescent triangular signs. The distant ones were small, the closer ones were large, the distant ones were clear orange or yellow, the closer ones were pale and slightly hazy, and they were triangles, or quadrilaterals, or electric currents or chains, and they shone in various forms, filling the field. Giovanni's heart was pounding, and he shook his head frantically. Then, really, all the blue, orange, and variously shining triangular signs throughout the beautiful field flickered and trembled, as if they were taking a breath. "I've already come completely to the plains of heaven," said Giovanni. "And besides, this train hasn't burned any coal," Giovanni said, sticking out his left hand and looking ahead through the window. "It must be alcohol or electricity," Campanella said. And just then, as if in reply, a booming voice like a cello could be heard from somewhere far away in the mist. "The train here doesn't run on steam or electricity. It just moves because it's supposed to. You think it's making a rumbling noise, but that's because you've only ever been used to trains that make noise." "I've heard that voice many times. I've heard it many times, in the woods and by the river. The beautiful little train rumbled along, through the pampas grass in the sky, swaying in the wind, through the water of the Milky Way, and through the pale blue light of the triangulation points, as it continued to run on and on. Oh, the gentians are blooming. It's definitely autumn now, Campanella said, pointing out the window. In the short patch of grass that bordered the tracks, a beautiful purple gentian flower was blooming, as if carved out of moonstone. Shall I jump off, grab it, and jump on again? Giovanni said, excited. No, it's gone so far behind. Almost before Campanella had finished saying this, another gentian flower, shining brightly, passed by. And then, one after another, a great number of gentian flowers, with yellow bottoms, like gushing, like rain, passed before his eyes, and the row of triangular signs, smoking and burning, lit up even more. Will Mother forgive me? Campanella suddenly said, stuttering a little and coughing as if he had made up his mind. Giovanni was silent, thinking, oh, that's right, my mother is near that orange triangular sign that looks like a speck of dust in the distance, and she's thinking about me right now. I'll do anything to make my mother truly happy. But what would make her happiest? Campanella seemed to be trying his best to hold back tears. Your mother hasn't done anything bad at all, Giovanni cried in shock. I don't know. But everyone is happiest if they do something truly good. So I think your mother will forgive me. Campanella seemed to have made up his mind about something. Suddenly, the inside of the car became bright and white. They looked, and saw that the water flowed silently and formlessly over a glittering galaxy bed that looked like a mixture of diamonds, dew, and all things splendid. In the middle of the stream, they could see an island with a pale, haloed light. On the flat top of the island, a magnificent, eye-catching white cross stood, and with a clear, golden halo, it seemed cast from the frozen Arctic clouds, and stood silently and forever. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Voices rang out from the front and the back. They turned to look, and saw that the travelers in the carriage were all standing straight with the folds of their kimonos hanging down, holding black Bibles to their chests, or wearing crystal rosaries, or praying humbly with their fingers clasped together. They both stood up straight without thinking. Campanella's cheeks seemed to shine beautifully, like the sign of a ripe apple. Then the island and the cross gradually faded into the background. The opposite bank also shone a pale blue and smoked, and occasionally, it seemed as if the pampas grass was fluttering in the wind, and its silvery smoke flashed, as if it were breathing. And the many gentian flowers, hiding in and out of the grass, looked like gentle foxfires. But only for a short while. There was a row of pampas grass blocking the gap between the river and the train, and Swan Island appeared twice in the background, but soon it was far away and small, like a picture, and the pampas grass began to rustle again, and finally it was completely out of sight. Behind Giovanni, who had been riding there for some time, a tall, Catholic-looking nun wearing a black sack had her round green eyes fixed straight down, as if listening devoutly to some words or voices that were still coming from that direction. The travelers quietly returned to their seats, and the two of them spoke softly to each other, in different words, about the new feelings, like sadness, that filled their hearts. We're almost at Swan Station. Yes, we'll be there at exactly 11 o'clock. Already, the green light of the signal and a faint white pillar flashed past the window, then the faint light in front of the switch, like a sulphurous flame, passed below the window, and the train slowed down, and soon a row of electric lights on the platform appeared, beautifully and regularly, and then they grew larger and wider, and the two of them came to a Halt right in front of the large clock at Swan Station. On the refreshing autumn face of the clock, the two hands of blue burnt steel clearly pointed to 11 o'clock. Everyone got off at once, and the car became empty. A sign read, 20-minute stop, under the clock. Shall we get off, too? Giovanni said. Let's get off. The two of them jumped up at the same time, ran out the door and headed for the ticket gate. However, there was no one there except for one bright purple light. They looked everywhere and could not find any sign of the station master or anyone with a red cap. The two of them came out into a small square in front of the station, surrounded by ginkgo trees that looked like crystal carvings. From there, a wide road led straight into the blue light of the Milky Way. None of the people who had gotten off earlier could be seen, and they had no idea where they had gone. As the two walked side by side along the white road, their shadows stretched out in all directions, just like the shadows of two pillars in a room with windows on all sides, or like the spokes of two wheels. Soon they came to the beautiful riverbank that they had seen from the train. Campanella took a pinch of the beautiful sand, spread it in his palm, and rubbed his fingers together as he spoke dreamily. All this sand is crystal. A small fire is burning inside. That's right, Giovanni answered absent-mindedly, wondering where he had learned that. The pebbles on the riverbank were all transparent, and were undoubtedly crystal, topaz, and some with crumpled, wrinkled surfaces, and some corundum that emitted a misty pale blue light from its ridges. Giovanni ran to the shore, and dipped his hands in the water. But the water from that mysterious galaxy was even more transparent than hydrogen. But the water was still flowing, because the parts of their wrists that had been submerged in the water looked a little like mercury, and the waves that hit their wrists gave off a beautiful phosphorescent glow and seemed to flicker and burn. Looking upstream, they saw white rocks stretching out along the river, flat like a playground, below cliffs covered with silver grass. There, 5 or 6 small figures stood and crouched, and occasionally some kind of tool would flash, as if they were digging or burying something. Let's go, the two of them shouted almost at once, and ran in that direction. At the entrance to the white rocks was a smooth china sign that read, Pliocene Beach, and on the other side of the beach, thin iron balustrades were planted here and there, and pretty wooden benches were also placed there. Oh, there's something strange. Campanella stopped curiously and picked up a long, black, pointed walnut-like thing from a rock. It's walnuts. Look, there are lots of them. They didn't wash down here. They're inside the rocks. They're big. This walnut is twice as big. It's not damaged at all. Let's go over there quickly. They're probably digging something up. The two of them, holding the jagged black walnuts, approached back to the same place. On the beach to their left, the waves were blazing like gentle lightning, and on the cliffs to their right, pampas grass swayed as if it were made entirely of silver and shells. As I got closer, I saw a tall man, who looked like a scholar, wearing terrible nearsighted glasses, and wearing rubber boots, busily writing something in his notebook, and enthusiastically giving directions to 3 people who looked like his assistants, who were swinging pickaxes and using shovels. Use the shovel so you don't damage that protrusion there, and the shovel. Oops, dig a little further away. No, no, why are you being so rough? I looked and saw that more than half of the bones of a huge, bluish-white animal had been dug out of the soft white rock, as if it had fallen sideways and been crushed. Looking more closely, there were about 10 rocks with 2 hoof prints, neatly cut into squares and numbered. Are you all going to come and see? The man who seemed to be a scholar said, looking my way and sparkling his glasses. There were a lot of walnuts. Well, these are walnuts from roughly 1.2 million years ago. They're quite recent. This was 1.2 million years ago, after the Tertiary period. This was the coast, and seashells can be found underneath here. The salt water used to ebb and flow just where the river flows. Now, is this the animal? It's called a boss. Hey, stop using that pickaxe. Try it carefully with a chisel. The boss is the ancestor of modern cows, and there used to be a lot of them. Specimen, no, it's necessary to prove it. From our point of view, this is a thick, fine layer of rock, and there is various evidence that it was formed about 1.2 million years ago, but to people other than us, it's a question of whether it looks like this layer, or whether it looks like wind, water, or the empty sky. Do you understand? But, you can't use a shovel there either. There should be ribs buried just underneath, right? The scholar ran off in a hurry. It's time. Let's go, Campanella said, comparing the map with his watch. Oh, well, we'll be off then. Giovanni bowed politely to the scholar. Is that so? Well, goodbye. The scholar, busily walking around again, started supervising. The two of them ran as hard as they could over the white rocks, trying not to fall behind the train. They really ran like the wind. They didn't get out of breath, and their knees didn't get hot. If they could run like this, Giovanni thought, they could run all over the world. Then the two of them passed the riverbank, and the lights at the ticket gates got brighter and brighter. Soon they were back in the car, looking out the window at the people they had just left. They heard a friendly-sounding adult's voice behind them asking, "May I ride here?" It was a man with a red beard, hunched over, wearing a brown, slightly tattered coat, and carrying a bag wrapped in a white cloth, divided into two pieces, slung over his shoulders. "Yes, it's fine," Giovanni greeted, shrugging his shoulders slightly. The man, smiling faintly beneath his beard, slowly placed his luggage on the overhead rack. Giovanni, feeling somehow very lonely and sad, was silently watching the clock ahead when, far up ahead, he heard something like a glass whistle sound. The train was already quietly moving along. Campanella looked here and there at the ceiling of the carriage. A black beetle had landed on one of the lights, and its shadow was being cast widely on the ceiling. The man with the red beard, laughing nostalgically about something, watched Giovanni and Campanella. The train was getting faster and faster, and the silver grass and the river took turns to shine from outside the window. The man with the red beard, feeling a little timidly, asked the two of them, "Where are you going?" "Going anywhere," Giovanni answered, looking a little awkward. "That's great. This train can actually go anywhere. Where are you going?" Quote. Campanella asked suddenly, as if he was fighting, and Giovanni couldn't help but laugh. The man sitting across from him, wearing a pointed hat and with a big key hanging from his waist, glanced his way and laughed, which made Campanella blush and burst out laughing as well. The man, however, didn't seem particularly upset, and just replied with his cheeks twitching, "I'll be getting off right there. I make a living catching birds." "What kinds of birds?" "Cranes. And geese. And herons and swans too." "Are there many cranes?" "Yes, they are, and they've been singing for a while now." "Have you not heard them?" "No. You can still hear them now. Don't you? Come on, listen carefully." The two raised their eyes, and listened carefully. Between the rumbling of the train and the wind blowing through the pampas grass, they could hear the sound of gushing water. "How do you catch cranes?" "Cranes, or herons?" "Herons," Giovanni replied, not wanting to care which. "That's not a big deal. Hers are all made of the sand of the Milky Way, and they can just space out, and they always return to the river, so I wait by the riverbank, and when they come crawling with their legs like this, I hold them down before they even hit the ground. Then the herons huddle together and die peacefully. The rest is pretty obvious. All we have to do is press them into leaves. You press herons into leaves? For specimens? No, they're not specimens. They all eat them, aren't they? That's strange. Campanella tilted his head. There's nothing strange or suspicious about that. Look. The man stood and took the package off the rack and quickly unwrapped it. Now, look. We just caught them. They're really herons. The two of them, exclaimed without thinking. The pure white bodies of the herons, shining like the northern cross we had seen earlier, were slightly flattened, and their black legs were curled up, lined up like reliefs. They have their eyes closed, Campanella said, gently touching the crescent-shaped white, closed eyes of the herons with his fingers. The spear-like white hairs on their heads were still there. See, isn't it? The birdcatcher folded up the furoshiki, wrapped it up again, and tied it up with string. Giovanni asked, wondering who on earth would eat a heron around here. Are herons tasty? Yes, we get orders every day. But geese sell better. They have a much nicer pattern, and besides, they don't require as much work. Look. The birdcatcher unwrapped another package. Then, just like the herons, there were mottled yellow and white geese, shining like lamps, lined up with their beaks aligned and slightly flat. These ones are ready to eat. What do you think? Have some. The birdcatcher gently tugged on the yellow goose's leg. Then it came off clean and sleek, as if it were made of chocolate. What do you think? Have a taste. The birdcatcher tore it in two and handed it over to him. Giovanni took a bite and thought, what? This is sweets after all. It's even tastier than chocolate, but there's no way geese are flying like this. This man is just a confectioner in some field. But I'm eating his sweets while making fun of him, and it's so weird, he thought. But he kept eating it. Have some more, the birdcatcher said, bringing out another package. Giovanni wanted to eat more, but he declined. Yes, thank you, he said. The birdcatcher then handed it over to the person with the key at the other seat. No, I'm sorry to take your business, the man said, and took off his hat. No, you're welcome. How is the migratory bird business this year? Well, it's wonderful. The day before yesterday, around the second period, we got calls from all over asking why the lighthouse light was turned off. Temporarily blank out, but it's not our fault, it's the migratory birds who pass in front of the lighthouse in a black mass, so it can't be helped. I told them, you idiot, that there's no point in bringing those complaints to me, but to the general with his fluffing cloak and incredibly thin legs and mouth. Ha ha. The silver grass had disappeared, so a light suddenly shone from the field across the way. Why are the herons having to go through all that trouble? Quote. Campanella had been meaning to ask for a while. Well, to eat a heron, the birdcatcher turned towards me. You either hang it in the water light of the Milky Way for 10 days, or you have to bury it in sand for 3 or 4 days. Then all the mercury evaporates and it becomes edible. This isn't a bird. It's just a sweet. Campanella, who seemed to have been thinking the same thing, asked boldly. The birdcatcher seemed very flustered and said, That's right, we have to get off here, as he stood up and picked up his luggage. And then he was out of sight. Where did he go? The two of them looked at each other, and the lighthouse keeper grinned and stretched a little as he looked out the window next to them. They both looked in that direction and saw the birdcatcher standing on a bed of tile grass that was emitting a beautiful yellow and blue-white phosphorescence, with a serious expression, his arms spread out, and his gaze fixed on the sky. He's going over there. What a strange sight. He's probably going to catch another bird. I hope the bird comes down quickly, before the train leaves. As soon as he spoke, out of the empty, bellflower-colored sky, a swarm of herons, just like the one they had seen earlier, came flying down, squealing like falling snow. Then the birdcatcher, as if he had done exactly as ordered, stood with his feet spread at a 60-degree angle, and with both hands held down each of the heron's black legs as they curled down, and placed it in the cloth bag. The herons then, like fireflies, flickered blue for a while in the bag, and finally turned a dull white, and closed their eyes. However, more birds were not caught, and landed safely on the sand of the Milky Way than were caught. As I watched, as soon as their feet touched the sand, they shrank and became flat, just like melting snow, and soon spread out over the sand and gravel, like copper juice from a smelting furnace. And for a while the bird's shape remained in the sand, but after 2 or 3 bright and dark periods, they had completely become the same color as their surroundings. The birdcatcher had put about 20 herons into his bag, and suddenly raised both hands, making the same gesture as a soldier dying after being hit by a bullet. But then, the birdcatcher was no longer there, and instead, he heard a familiar voice say next to Giovanni, "Oh, how refreshing. There's nothing better than earning enough to fit your body." The birdcatcher was already arranging the herons he had caught, and stacking them one by one. Why did they all come here from over there at once? Giovanni. But, feeling that it was both obvious and not so obvious, he asked, "Why?" "Because we came because we wanted to come." "Where on earth are you all from?" Giovanni wanted to reply immediately, but he just couldn't think of where on earth they had come from. Campanella's face was red as well, as he tried to remember something. "Ah, from far away." The birdcatcher nodded without hesitation as if he understood. "This is the end of the Shiratori district. Look, that's the famous Alberio Observatory. Outside the window, in the middle of the Amanahashadate River, which looked like it was filled with fireworks, there were about 4 large black buildings, and on the flat roof of one of them, 2 large, eye-opening, transparent spheres, one made of blue gemstone and the other of yellow gemstone, were silently spinning around in circles. The yellow one gradually moved away, and the smaller blue one came towards us, and soon the 2 edges came together, forming the shape of a beautiful green double convex lens, and gradually the center began to bulge, and finally the blue one came completely in front of the topaz, creating a green center and a bright yellow ring. Then it gradually moved away again to the side, repeating the shape of the previous lens, and finally they parted ways, and the sapphire moved away, and the yellow one came towards us, and once again it was just as it had been before. Surrounded by the formless, soundless water of the galaxy, the black weather station lay quietly, as if asleep. That's a device to measure the speed of water. Water. As the birdcatcher began to speak, "May I see your ticket?" The tall conductor, wearing a red hat, was standing upright next to the 3 of them. The birdcatcher silently took out a small piece of paper from his hiding place. The conductor looked at it for a moment, and then, moving his fingers, held his hand out towards Giovanni and the others, as if to say, "What about you?" Well, Giovanni fidgeted, as if he had no idea what to do, and took out a small gray-colored ticket. Giovanni, completely flustered, wondering whether it had been in his jacket pocket, put his hand in, and found a large folded piece of paper. Wondering if something like this was inside, he quickly took it out, and it was a green piece of paper about the size of a postcard folded in four. The conductor was holding it out, so he thought it didn't matter what it was, so he handed it over, and the conductor straightened up and carefully opened it and looked at it. As he was reading, he was constantly fixing the buttons on his jacket, and the lighthouse keeper was peering at it intently from below, so Giovanni thought it must have been a certificate or something, and his heart started to warm up a little. "Did you bring this from the third dimension?" the conductor asked. "I don't know." Giovanni looked up, relieved that everything was fine, and chuckled. "That's all right. We'll arrive at Southern Cross at around the next 3 o'clock. The conductor handed the paper to Giovanni and headed the other way. Campanella hurriedly peeked at the piece of paper, as if he could hardly wait to see what it was. Giovanni had also been eager to see it. However, it was a strange figure of 10 printed in a completely black arabesque pattern, and as he stared at it in silence he felt as if he was being sucked into it. Then the birdcatcher glanced at it from the side and said in a panic, "Oh, this is quite something. This is a ticket that can take you even to the real heaven. Not just heaven, it's a pass that lets you go anywhere you want. If you have this, I see, you should be able to go anywhere on this incomplete fantasy fourth-order galaxy railway, so you guys are quite impressive." "I don't know," Giovanni replied, blushing, and folded it up again and put it away. Feeling awkward, Campanella and I continued to look out the window, and I could vaguely make out the birdcatcher glancing back and forth as if he was some kind of big deal. "We're almost at Eagle Station," Campanella said, comparing the map to the 3 small blue-white triangular signs lined up on the opposite bank. For some reason, Giovanni, without knowing why, suddenly became extremely annoyed at the birdcatcher next to him. He rejoiced at the relief of having caught the heron, wrapped it up in a white cloth, glanced at someone's ticket in amazement and hurriedly praised it, and as he thought about each of these things, he felt like he wanted to give anything Giovanni had or anything he ate for the birdcatcher, and that if it would bring true happiness to this person, he would be happy to stand on the shining banks of the Milky Way and catch birds for 100 years straight, and he simply could not keep quiet any longer. He was about to ask him what it was he really wanted, but that seemed a bit abrupt, so he turned around wondering what to do. And the birdcatcher was gone. He could no longer see the white luggage on the luggage rack. Thinking that he was standing outside the window again, bracing his feet, looking up at the sky, preparing to catch a heron, he hurried over to look in that direction, but outside there was only beautiful sand and waves of white pampas grass, and he couldn't see the birdcatcher's broad back or pointed hat. "I wonder where he went," Campanella said absent-mindedly. "Where did he go? I wonder where we'll meet again." I couldn't help but say a few things to him. "Yeah, I think so, too. I felt like he was in the way. That's why I'm so miserable." Giovanni had never really felt this strange before, and he didn't think he'd ever said anything like that before. "I can smell apples. Maybe it's because I'm thinking about apples now." Campanella looked around curiously. "It really does smell like apples. And it smells like briars too." Giovanni looked around, but it seemed like the smell was coming in through the window. It was autumn now, so Giovanni thought there was no way the smell of briars could be coming in. Suddenly, a boy of about 6 with shiny black hair was standing there, trembling and barefoot, in his red jacket, with a look of extreme shock on his face. Next to him was a tall young man, neatly dressed in black clothes, holding the boy's hand tightly, with a posture like a Zelkova tree blowing in the wind. "Oh, where are we? It's so pretty." Behind the young man, another pretty girl with brown eyes, about 12, wearing a black coat, was clinging to the young man's arm and gazing curiously out of the window. Oh, this is Lancashire. No, Connecticut. No, oh, we've come to the sky. We're going to heaven. Look. That sign is a heavenly sign. There's nothing to be afraid of anymore. We've been called by God. The young man in black said to the girl, beaming with joy. However, for some reason, he wrinkled his forehead again, and looked very tired. He made the boy sit next to Giovanni with a forced smile. Then he gently pointed to the seat next to Campanella. The girl sat there obediently, and clasped her hands neatly. I think I'm going to my sister's place, the boy said to the young man who had just sat down, his face strange as he sat down across from the lighthouse keeper. The young man looked at the child's wavy, wet head with an indescribably sad expression on his face. The girl suddenly put her hands over her face and burst into tears. Dad and Yakiniku Yoni still have a lot of work to do, but they will be here soon. But more importantly, how long have you been waiting, Mom? I wonder what songs my precious Tadashi is singing right now, or if he is holding hands with the others on this snowy morning, playing round and round in the garden and through the bushes. You have really been waiting and worrying about me, so please hurry up, Mom. Let's meet. Yes, but I wish I hadn't gone on the boat. Yes. But look at that beautiful river. You know, it always looked dimly white from the window all that summer, when we were taking a rest, twinkling, twinkling, singing. Little stars. It's over there. See, it's beautiful, it shines so brightly. The crying sister wiped her eyes with her handkerchief and looked outside. The young man spoke again to the siblings, gently, as if to teach them. We no longer have any sorrows. We have traveled through such a beautiful place, and soon we will go to God's house. There, it is already bright, smells good, and is full of fine people. And those who boarded the boat in our place will surely be rescued, and go to their worried fathers and mothers, or to their own homes. Come, we will be there soon, so let's cheer up and sing merrily. The young man stroked the boy's wet black hair, and as he comforted the others, his own face began to brighten. Where are you all from? What happened? The lighthouse keeper asked the young man. Finally understanding a little, the young man smiled faintly. No, the ship hit an iceberg and sank. Our father had returned to his home country 2 months ago for urgent business, so we left later. I was attending university, and was employed as a tutor. But on the 12th day, which was either today or yesterday, the ship hit an iceberg, tilted all at once, and was already on the verge of sinking. The moonlight was faintly visible, but the fog was very thick. The port half of the boat was already destroyed, so there was no way everyone could get on. The ship would sink any minute, so I desperately cried out, "Please let the little ones on board." The people nearby quickly made way for them, and the children were able to get on. They prayed for us. However, there were many small children and parents on the way to the boat, and I didn't have the courage to push them aside. Still, I felt it was my duty to help these people, so I tried to push the children in front of me aside. But then, I thought that they would be better off if they all went before God together, rather than trying to help them in this way. Then, I thought that I was the only one who had sinned against God, so I really wanted to help them. But, watching, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I pushed them into the boat, where there were only children, and their mothers blew them kisses like crazy. It was so heartbreaking to see Dad standing upright, enduring his sadness. The ship would soon sink, so we gathered together, prepared ourselves for the worst, held the 2 men in our arms, and waited for the ship to sink, trying to stay afloat as long as we could. Someone threw a life V, but it slid all the way overboard. With all my might, I let go of the latticework on the deck, and the three of us clung to it tightly. Out of nowhere came the voice of number 306. All at once we all sang it in various languages. At that moment, we suddenly heard a loud noise and fell into the water, thought we had entered a whirlpool, but I held the men tightly, and then, feeling a daze, we realized we were already here. Their mother passed away 2 years ago. Yes, the boat must have been saved, because it was rowed by experienced sailors and quickly left the ship. Sighs and cries of prayer could be heard from all around, and Giovanni and Campanella's eyes welled up with tears as they vaguely remembered many things they had forgotten. Ah, isn't that big ocean called the Pacific? In that ocean at the northern end where icebergs flow, someone is working hard on a small boat, fighting the wind, the freezing saltwater, and the bitter cold. I feel so sorry for that person. What on earth can I do to bring about their happiness? Giovanni bowed his head and became completely depressed. I don't know what happiness is. No matter how hard something is, if it's something that happens while you're on the right path, then going up and down the mountain pass is just one step closer to true happiness, the lighthouse keeper comforted. Yes, that's right. But you just have to bear all the sorrows in order to reach the greatest happiness, the young man answered as if praying. And the brother and sister were already exhausted, each leaning back in their seats and sleeping. Those bare feet from a moment ago had once been wearing soft, white shoes. The train rumbled along the bank of the glittering phosphorescent river. Looking out the window on the other side, the fields looked just like a magic lantern. There were hundreds, even thousands, of triangular markers of all sizes, and survey flags with red dots on the larger ones, and at the end of the field they covered the whole area, and gathered in great numbers like a pale blue mist, and from there, or perhaps from further away, vague smoke like signals of various shapes would occasionally be sent up, taking turns, into the beautiful bellflower-colored sky. The beautiful, clear breeze was filled with the scent of roses. How do you like it? This must be your first time eating an apple like this, said the lighthouse keeper sitting across from me, holding a large apple, beautifully colored in gold and red, in his lap with both hands. To avoid dropping it. Oh, where did you come from? They're so big. Do they grow apples like this around here? The young man seemed genuinely surprised, and he narrowed his eyes, tilted his head, gazing at the pile of apples the lighthouse keeper held in both his hands, losing his senses. Oh, please take some. Please, please take some. The young man picked one up and looked at Giovanni and the others. Now, you boys over there. What do you think? Please take some. Giovanni was a little annoyed to be called a boy, and kept quiet, but Campanella said, thank you. The young man then picked one himself and sent it to the two boys, so Giovanni stood up and thanked him. The lighthouse keeper finally had both arms free, and this time he gently placed one on the lap of the sleeping siblings. Thank you very much. Where do they grow such fine apples? The young man asked, looking at them intently. Of course we do farming around here, but it's usually the case that good things grow on their own. Even with farming, I don't do that much work. In most cases, if you sow the seeds you want, they grow on their own. Even rice doesn't have a husk like in the Pacific, it's 10 times larger and smells better. But where you live, there's no farming anymore. There's not even a bit of dregs for apples or sweets, so they all become different for each person, and just scatter from the holes in the fur, giving off a faint, pleasant fragrance. Suddenly the boy opened his eyes wide and said, oh, I was just dreaming about my mother. My mother was in a place with a beautiful cupboard and books. She looked at me, held out her hand, and smiled. I said, "Mom, shall I get you an apple?" I woke up. Oh, this is the train we were on earlier. The apple is over there. This man gave it to me, said the young man. Thank you, man. Oh, Sister Kaoru is still asleep. I'll wake you up. Sister. Look, I've got an apple. Wake up. The older sister woke up laughing. She put her hands over her eyes in a daze, and then looked at the apple. The boy was already eating it as if it were a pie. The beautiful skin that they had just peeled, rolled up like a corkscrew, and evaporated, glowing gray as it fell to the floor. The two of them carefully put the apples away in their pockets. On the other side of the river, a large, lush, green forest was visible, with its branches full of ripe, round, shining red apples, and in the middle of the forest stood a tall triangular sign, and from the forest, mixed with orchestral bells and xylophones, an indescribably beautiful sound drifted, as if melting and seeping, carried by the wind. The young man shuddered and shivered. As he listened to the score in silence, it seemed as if bright fields or carpets of yellow or pale green spread out all around, and that pure white, waxy dew was skimming the face of the sun. "Oh, that crow," cried the girl next to Campanella, who was called Kaoru. "They're not crows. They're all magpies." Campanella called out again, casually, scolding him, which made Giovanni laugh again, and the girl looked embarrassed. There were so many black birds perched in a row on the pale blue light of the riverbank, basking in the faint light of the river. "They must be magpies, because they've got hair sticking out nicely on the back of their heads," the young man said, trying to reconcile. The triangular marker in the blue forest across the way was now completely in front of the train. Then, from far behind the train, the familiar tune of hymn number 306 was heard. It seemed like a large group of people were singing along. The young man's face turned pale, and he stood up and looked like he was going to go away, but then he changed his mind and sat down again. Kaoruko put her handkerchief to her face. Even Giovanni's nose felt strange. But before long, the song started to be sung by someone, and gradually it became clearer and stronger. Without even thinking, Giovanni and Campanella started singing along too. Then the blue olive forest, shining brightly beyond the invisible Milky Way, gradually faded into the background, and the sound of the mysterious instrument coming from there was worn down by the hum of the train and the wind, and became much fainter. "Oh, there's a peacock. Oh, there's a peacock. That must be the Morikoto Inn. I'm sure the members of the old big orchestra are gathered in that forest, and I think there are lots of blue peacocks and things around." "Yes, there were lots of them," the girl replied. Giovanni saw the reflection of the peacock's light, which flashed blue and white from time to time over the forest, which had become tiny and now looked like another green shell, spreading and closing its wings. "Yes, I heard the sound of a peacock just now," Campanella said to the girl. "Yes, there were definitely about 30 of them," the girl replied. Giovanni suddenly felt indescribably sad, and was about to say, "Campanella, let's get off here and go play," with a frightened look on his face. But then Giovanni saw something strange far downstream. It was definitely some kind of long, smooth black thing that jumped out above the invisible water of the Milky Way, moved in a bow-like shape, and then disappeared back under the water. Thinking that something was strange, he paid closer attention. And it seemed that this time something similar had happened. Again, but much closer. Soon, he saw many of those strange, smooth black things jumping out of the water, flying in circles and then diving headfirst back into the water again, here and there. They all seem to be swimming upstream like fish. Well, I wonder what it is, Ta-chan. Look, there are so many of them. I wonder what it is, said the boy, who had been rubbing his eyes sleepily as he stood up in surprise. I wonder what it is. The young man also stood up. Well, it's a strange fish. I wonder what it is, answered Campanella, looking in that direction. This is the first time I've seen a dolphin. But this isn't the sea, is it? Dolphins don't always live in the sea, came that mysterious low voice from somewhere again. The dolphin's shape was truly strange, as it jumped out of the water with its two fins just as if it was holding its hands down and immobile, and then it respectfully put its head down and went back underwater in the same immobile position. At that moment, the water of the invisible Milky Way also rippled gently like a blue flame. Is it a dolphin or a fish? The girl asked Campanella. The boy was asleep, leaning back in his seat looking exhausted. Dolphins aren't fish. They're beasts just like whales, Campanella replied. Have you ever seen a whale? Yes, I have. You can only see the head and black tail of a whale. When it blows water, it looks just like the ones in the books. That's a big whale, isn't it? Whales are big. They're so big they look like they have babies. Yeah, I saw one. In Arabian Nights. His sister was talking with amusement, playing with her thin silver ring. Campanella, I'm going now. I've never even seen a whale. Giovanni was so annoyed that he couldn't stand it, but he was firm. He bit his lip and looked out the window. Outside the window, the shape of the dolphin was no longer visible, and the river divided into two. In the middle of the pitch-black island, a very tall tower was built, and on top of it stood a man wearing loose clothes and a red hat. He was looking up at the sky and signaling with a red and blue flag in both hands. While Giovanni was watching, the man kept waving the red flag. But suddenly he took it down and hid it behind his back, and raised the blue flag high up and waved it vigorously like an orchestra conductor. Suddenly, there was a sound like rain in the air, and whole clumps of something black, flying across the river like shotguns. Giovanni instinctively stuck half his body out of the window, and looked up. Under the beautiful, bare sky of bellflowers, tens of thousands of tiny birds were passing by, group after group, each singing busily and noisily. Don't let the birds fly away, Giovanni said from outside the window. Drum. Campanella also looked up at the sky. At that moment, the man in the loose clothing on the tower suddenly raised a red flag and started waving it around like crazy. With that, the flock of birds stopped passing by, and at the same time, a crashing sound was heard downstream, and then it was silent for a while. But then, the signalman in the red cap was waving his blue flag again and shouting, "Now is the time for migratory birds to migrate," and he could clearly hear his voice. Along with that, a flock of tens of thousands of birds raced straight across the sky. The girl peeked out from the window in the middle where the two of them were looking, and looked up at the sky with her beautiful cheeks shining. Oh, there are so many birds, and oh my, how beautiful the sky is. The girl tried to talk to Giovanni, but he thought it was presumptuous, and didn't want to hear it, and just looked up at the sky with her mouth closed. The girl let out a small sigh of relief, and returned to her seat in silence. Campanella looked reluctant, with his face pulled out of the window, and was looking at the map. I wonder if that person is giving directions to the birds, the girl asked Campanella softly. He's signaling for the migratory birds. He must be sending a signal from somewhere, Campanella answered, sounding a little unsure. And then the car became quiet. Giovanni wanted to pull his head back, but it was too painful to stick his face out into the light, so he just stood there, whistling in silence. Why am I so sad? I need to have a clearer and bigger heart. Far beyond this bank I can see a small blue flame that looks just like smoke. It's really quiet and cold. I look at it carefully to calm my heart. Giovanni looked in that direction, pressing both hands against his hot and painful head. Oh, I wonder if there really is someone who will go with me, no matter how far I go. Even Campanella is having such an interesting conversation with a girl like that, and I'm really in pain. Giovanni's eyes were filling with tears again, and the Milky Way only looked dim and white, as if it had gone far away. Then the train gradually moved away from the river and began to pass over the cliffs. On the opposite bank, the black cliffs also gradually grew higher as they went downstream. And then he caught a glimpse of a large corn tree. Its leaves were curled up, and beneath them large beautiful green bracts spewed red hairs and pearl-like kernels were glimpsed. Their numbers gradually increased, and now they were lined up like a row between the cliff and the railroad tracks, and when Giovanni instinctively pulled his face out the window and looked out the other way, he saw that the large corn trees were planted almost all the way to the horizon of the beautiful plain, swaying gently in the breeze, and the tips of their magnificent curled leaves, covered with dew like diamonds that had absorbed a lot of sunlight during the day, glowing and shining red and green. Campanella said to Giovanni, "That's corn, isn't it?" But Giovanni's spirits didn't improve, so he just looked blankly at the field and answered, "I guess so." The train gradually got quieter, passed several signals and railway lights, and stopped at a small station. The blue and white clock in front of the train struck exactly 2 o'clock, and the wind died down and the train stopped moving. The pendulum swung steadily in the silent, quiet field, keeps ticking away the time. And then, far, far away, from the end of the field, a faint melody drifted along like a thread, alongside the sound of the pendulum. "It's the New World Symphony," the girl in the seat opposite said softly, looking at me as if talking to herself. Everyone in the train, including the tall young man in black, was already having sweet dreams. Why can't I be more happy with such a quiet cousin? Why am I so lonely? But Campanella is so mean. He's on the train with me, but he's only talking to that girl. I'm so miserable. Giovanni was once again gazing out the window, hiding half his face with his hands. A clear glass-like whistle blew as the train started to move quietly, and Campanella was whistling a lonely tune about the stars. Yes, this area is a terrible plateau. Behind me was the voice of someone who sounded older, talking clearly, as if he'd just woken up. "You can't even grow corn unless you make a hole 2 feet deep with a stick and sow it there." "Really? It must be quite a distance to the river." Yes, it's 6,000 feet to the river. It's a terrible canyon. Yes, this must be the Colorado Plateau." Giovanni couldn't help but think about it. The sister had her little brother sleeping on her chest, her black eyes cast into the distance, lost in thought, looking at nothing at all. Campanella was still whistling to himself sadly. And the boy, his face like an apple wrapped in silk, was looking in Giovanni's direction. Suddenly the corn disappeared and a huge black field opened up. The New World Symphony rose more clearly than ever from the horizon, and in the pitch-black field, an Indian with white bird feathers on his head, worn many stones on his arms and chest, and an arrow on his small bow, chased the train with all his might. "Oh, it's an Indian. It's an Indian. Look, sister." The young man in black woke up. Giovanni and Campanella also stood up. "He's coming running. Oh, he's coming running." They're chasing after us, aren't they? No, I'm not chasing a train. I'm either hunting or dancing, the young man said, standing with his hands in his pockets as if he'd forgotten where he was. The Indian really looked like he was half dancing. First of all, even if he was running, he could step more economically and seriously. Suddenly, the bright white feathers began to fall forward, and the Indian stopped dead in his tracks, quickly drawing his bow into the air. A crane staggered down from there, and landed in the Indian's wide open arms as he started running again. The Indian stood there laughing happily. Then the shadow looking in our direction with the crane in hand got smaller and smaller and further away, and 2 electric pole insulators flashed in succession, and it turned into a corn forest once again. Looking out the window on this side, I saw that the train was running over a really high cliff, and at the bottom of the valley, the river was flowing, wide and bright. Yes, it's already downhill from here. This time we have to go all the way down to the water level in one go, so it's not easy. Because of this slope, the train will never come from the other side to this side. Look, it's getting faster and faster now, said the old voice from before. The train continued to descend. When the railway line reached the edge of the cliff, the bright river could be seen below. Giovanni's mood gradually brightened. As the train passed in front of a small hut, he saw a dejected child standing in front of it looking in their direction and couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow!" The train continued to go. Everyone in the room was half falling backwards, but they were still clinging tightly to their seats. Giovanni couldn't help but laugh with Campanella. The Milky Way must have been flowing very violently right beside the train, because it was occasionally flickering as it flowed. Pale red riverside dianthus flowers were blooming here and there. The train was moving slowly, as if it had finally settled down. On both sides of the river there were flags with the shapes of stars and pickaxes on them. I wonder what those flags are, Giovanni finally said. I don't know, it's not on the map. There's an iron boat there, isn't there? Ah, said the girl. Ah, that's the engineer's flag. They're doing bridge building drills. But I can't see any soldiers. At that moment, a little downstream near the opposite bank, the invisible water of the Milky Way flashed brightly, and jumped high like a pillar, and there was a loud thud. It's an explosion, Campanella said. The pillar-like water disappeared, and large salmon and trout, with their white bellies shining brightly, were thrown into the air, drawing circles and falling back into the water. Giovanni felt so light he wanted to jump up and down, and said, "It's an engineer battalion in the sky. How about that?" The trout jumped up like this. "I've never had such a fun trip. It's nice. If you look closely at that trout, it's about this big. There must be a lot of them in this water. Are there small fish?" the girl asked, fascinated by the conversation. "There must be. There are big ones, so there must be small ones too. But it was so far away, so I couldn't see the small ones just now." Giovanni's mood had improved completely, and he answered the girl with an amused laugh. "That must be the shrine of the twin stars," the boy suddenly exclaimed, pointing out the window. On a low hill to the right stood 2 shrines, which looked as if they were made out of small crystals, standing side by side. "What is the Twin Star Shrine? I've heard it from my mother many times before. It's a small crystal shrine, so I'm sure it's the one. Tell me, what did the twin stars do?" "I know too. The twin stars went out to play in the field, and got into a fight with a crow. That's not it. You see, on the bank of the Milky Way, my mother told me a story. Then a comet came going, giggy-I-hoo, giggy-I-hoo. No, my dear, that's not it. That's someone else. Then maybe he's playing the flute over there right now? He's going to the sea right now. You can't. He's already come up from the sea. That's right. I know, I'll tell you a story. The other side of the river suddenly turned red. Poplar trees and other things stood out in pitch black, and the invisible waves of the Milky Way occasionally flashed red like needles. A huge, red fire was burning in a field on the opposite bank, and the black smoke seemed to scorch the cold, bellflower-colored sky. The fire was burning redder and clearer than rubies, and more beautiful and intoxicating than lithium. What kind of fire is that? What do you need to burn to create such a red glow? Giovanni asked. Scorpion fire, Campanella replied, peering at the map again. Oh, I know what scorpion fire is. What's scorpion fire? Quote, Giovanni asked. A scorpion burned to death. That fire is still burning to this day, I've heard from my father many times. A scorpion is an insect, right? Yes, scorpions are insects. But they're good insects. Scorpions aren't good insects. I saw one soaked in alcohol at the museum. The teacher said that it has a hook on its tail, and if it stings you will die. That's right. But they're good insects, my father said. A long time ago in the fields of Bardra, there was a scorpion that lived by killing and eating small insects and such. Then one day, he was found by a weasel and was about to be eaten. The scorpion ran as hard as he could, but the weasel was about to hold him down, when suddenly, he saw a well in front of him and fell into it. He could not get out no matter what, and began to drown. Then the scorpion prayed, saying, Oh, I don't know how many lives I have taken up until now, and this time when the weasel was about to take me, I ran with all my might. But in the end, I ended up like this. Oh, nothing can be relied upon. Why didn't I just give my body to the weasel in silence? Then the weasel might have survived another day. Please, God, look into my heart. Don't throw away your life so meaninglessly, and next time, please use my body for the happiness of all people. That's what the scorpion prayed. And then one day, he said he saw his body burning in a beautiful red flame, illuminating the night. His father said it's still burning. That's really the fire. Yes. Look. The triangular signs around there are lined up in the shape of a scorpion. Giovanni saw 3 triangular signs just beyond the big fire, just like the arms of a scorpion, and 5 triangular signs on this side, lined up like the tail and hooks of a scorpion. And the beautiful red scorpion fire burned brightly and silently. As the fire moved further and further back, everyone heard an indescribably lively sound, the sounds of various musical instruments, the smell of flowers, whistling, and the chatter of people. It seemed as if there was a town or something nearby, and that there was a festival there. Let the dew fall on the centaur, suddenly cried the boy next to Giovanni, who had been asleep until then, looking out the window. There stood a Chinese cypress tree, bright green like a Christmas tree, and in it stood many miniature lights, as if they were 1,000 fireflies. Oh, that's right, tonight is the Centaur Festival. Oh, this is the Centaur Village, Campanella said immediately. No script for this moment. I never miss a ball toss, the boy said proudly. We'll be at Southern Cross soon. Please get ready to get off, the young man told everyone. I'm on the train for a bit longer, the boy said. The girl next to Campanella stood up nervously and started to get ready, but she still didn't seem to want to be separated from Giovanni and the others. We have to get off here, the young man said, looking down at the boy with his mouth tightly closed. No, I'll ride the train a little further before we leave. Giovanni couldn't help himself and said, Come on with us. We have tickets to go anywhere. But we have to get off here. We're going to heaven, the girl said sadly. We don't have to go to heaven. My teacher said we have to make a place here that's even better than heaven. But my mother has been there, and God says so. That God is a fake God. Your God is a fake God. No, he's not. What kind of God is your God? The young man said, laughing. I don't really know. But it's not like that. He is the one and only true God. Of course there is only one true God. Oh, it's not like that. He is the one and only true God. Isn't that so? I pray that you will soon meet us before the true God. The young man folded his hands modestly. The girl did just the same. They all looked really sad to say goodbye, and their faces looked a little pale. Giovanni almost cried out loud. Ah, so are you ready to go? We'll soon be at Southern Cross. Ah, that was when it happened. Far downstream on the invisible Milky Way, a cross studded with blue, orange, and every other light, rose and shone from the river like a tree, and above it a ring of pale blue clouds hung like a halo. There was a great commotion inside the train. Everyone stood up straight and began to pray, just like at the Northern Cross. All around us we could hear cries of joy, like children leaping at a melon, and deep, modest sighs that were hard to describe. Slowly the cross came directly in front of the window, and we could see the pale blue clouds, ringing gently and gently around us, like the flesh of an apple. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Everyone's voices rang out cheerfully. And from far away in the sky, from far away in the cold sky, they heard the clear and indescribably refreshing sound of a trumpet. Then, amid the many signals and electric lights, the train gradually slowed down, and finally came to a complete stop right opposite the cross. Come on, let's get off. The young man took the boy's hand, and the sister helped each other up and started walking toward the exit on the other side. Well, then, the girl said, turning around to them. Well, then, Giovanni said brusquely, as if he was trying to hold back tears. The girl looked very distressed, widening her eyes, and looked back at them once more, and then she left in silence. The train was now more than half empty, and suddenly it felt deserted, and the air was filled with wind. As they watched, they saw everyone line up modestly, kneeling on the banks of the Milky Way in front of the cross. Then, the two of them saw a person in a glorious white kimono come towards them, outstretching his hand, crossing the invisible waters of the Milky Way. But by that time the glass whistle had already sounded and the train had started to move, and just as they thought this, a silvery mist came floating downriver, and they could no longer see anything in that direction. All they could see were many walnut trees, with their leaves shining brilliantly, and electric squirrels with golden halos peeking their cute faces out from among them. At that moment, the mist began to clear up. There was a street lined with small electric lights, as if it was a highway leading somewhere. It continued along the tracks for a while. And as the two of them passed in front of the testimony, the small pea-colored fire would suddenly go out as if in greeting, and light up again as they passed by. Looking back, the cross from before had become so small that it was practically hanging from his chest. He was so dim that he couldn't tell whether the young girls and boys from before were still kneeling on the white beach in front of him, or had gone up into the heavens, whose direction he couldn't tell. Giovanni took a deep breath. Campanella, so we're alone again. Let's go together, no matter how far we go. I don't mind burning my body 100 times, like that scorpion. If it's for the happiness of all of us. Yes. Me too. Beautiful tears were welling up in Campanella's eyes. But what exactly is true happiness? Giovanni said. I don't know, Campanella said absent-mindedly. Let's do our best, Giovanni said, taking a deep breath as if new strength was welling up in his chest. Ah, there's a coal bag over there. The hole in the sky. Campanella pointed to a part of the Milky Way, slightly avoiding the other side. Giovanni looked in that direction and was completely startled. In one part of the Milky Way there was a big, black hole. No matter how hard he rubbed his eyes to look, he couldn't see anything, and his eyes just started to hurt. Giovanni said, I'm not afraid of that vast darkness anymore. I'm sure I'll go and find everyone's true happiness. Let's go on together, no matter how far we go. Yes, I'm sure I will. Oh, how beautiful this field is over there. Everyone's gathered there. That's the real heaven. Ah, that's my mother over there. Suddenly Campanella pointed to the beautiful field that was visible in the distance outside the window and cried out. Giovanni also looked over there, but the place was just a hazy white haze, and he couldn't believe what Campanella had said. Feeling indescribably lonely, he gazed blankly in that direction. And on the opposite bank of the river he saw two telegraph poles with red arms linked together on either side. Campanella, let's go together. As Giovanni said this, he turned around and saw that he was no longer in the seat where Campanella had been sitting, and only a black velvet was shining. Giovanni stood up as if he was being shot. Then he leaned out the window so no one could hear, slammed his chest as hard as he could, and cried out, and then burst out crying at the top of his lungs. It seemed as if the whole place had suddenly become pitch black. At that moment, he heard that gentle, cello-like voice he had heard so many times before, from behind Giovanni. Giovanni suddenly realized, wiped away his tears, and turned around to see a thin man with a pale face and a big black hat, smiling gently and holding a large book, sitting in the seat where Campanella had been. Your friend must have gone somewhere. He really has gone far away tonight. There's no point in you searching for Campanella now. Oh, why? I said I'd go straight with Campanella. Oh, that's what everyone thinks. But you can't go with him. And everyone is Campanella. Everyone you meet, they've eaten apples and ridden trains with you countless times. So, just as you thought before, you should search for the greatest happiness of everyone, and go there quickly with everyone. Only there can you truly go with Campanella forever. Oh, I'm sure I will. How can I seek that? Oh, I seek that too. Hold on to your ticket. And you must study hard. You've studied chemistry, haven't you? You know that water is made of oxygen and hydrogen. No one doubts that nowadays, because experiments have shown that it really is. But in the past, people argued about whether it's made of mercury and salt, or mercury and sulfur, and so on. Everyone will say that their own God is the real God, but we'll all shed tears over the things people who believe in other gods have done. Then we'll argue about whether our hearts are good or bad. And we'll never win. But if you really study and separate true thoughts from false ones through experiments, and you determine the method of the experiment, then faith will become just like chemistry. But, look at this book. This is a dictionary of geography and history. This page of this book describes the geography and history of 2200 BC. Look closely, it's not about 2200 BC, it describes the geography and history that people thought about around 2200 BC. So this one page is a whole book of geography and history. And what's written here was mostly true around 2200 BC. If you look, you'll find plenty of evidence. But if you start to wonder if that's true, look, that's the next page. 1000 BC. Geography and history have changed quite a bit. At this time it was like this. Don't look funny. We simply feel our bodies, our thoughts, the Milky Way, the trains, and history. So look, calm down a little with me. Okay. The man raised a finger and gently lowered it. Suddenly, Giovanni saw himself, his thoughts, the trains, the scholars, the Milky Way, all glowing brightly, then disappearing silently, then lighting up and disappearing again, and when one of them lit up, the whole wide world opened up, containing all history, and then it vanished, and it was empty, and that was it. Slowly and quickly, and soon everything was back to normal. Well then, your experiment must therefore cover the whole of this fragmented thought from beginning to end. That is the difficult part. But of course it is okay to do it just for that moment. Oh, look, I see Placia's over there. You must untie his chains. At that moment, a pale blue signal light shot up from beyond the pitch-black horizon, just like daytime, and the inside of the train became completely bright. The signal light continued to shine high in the sky. Ah, the Magellan Nebula. Now I will surely find true happiness for myself, for my mother, for Campanella, and for everyone. Giovanni bit his lip and stood, looking at the Magellan Nebula. For that most fortunate person. Now, hold on to your ticket. You must no longer ride the train of dreams, but walk straight ahead through the fires and raging waves of the real world. You must never lose that one true ticket, the only one in the Milky Way. Heard that cello-like voice, and Giovanni saw that the Milky Way was now far away, the wind was blowing, and he was standing upright on a grassy hill, and he heard the quiet feet of Dr. Vulcaniro approaching from afar. Thank you. I did a very good experiment. I was thinking earlier that I wanted to carry out an experiment in a quiet place like this, where I could communicate my ideas to people from afar. Everything you said is in my notebook. Now, go home and sleep. Just as you decided in your dream, you should go straight ahead. And from now on, come and consult me about anything at any time. I will definitely go straight ahead. I will definitely seek true happiness. Giovanni said firmly. Well, goodbye then. This is the ticket from earlier. The doctor put the folded green paper into Giovanni's pocket, and then the shape of the paper had disappeared beyond the weather wheel pillar. Giovanni ran straight down the hill. Then he noticed that his pocket was very heavy and rattling. He stopped in the woods to examine it, and found that inside the green mysterious sky ticket he had seen in his dream earlier were 2 large gold coins. Thank you, doctor, mother. I'll bring the milk right away. Giovanni cried and started running again. All sorts of things gathered in Giovanni's chest all at once, and he felt an indescribable sadness and newness. The harp star moved far to the west and then stretched its legs again as if in a dream. Giovanni opened his eyes. He had been sleeping exhausted in the grass on the original hill. His chest felt strangely warm, and cold tears were streaming down his cheeks. Giovanni woke up with a spring in his step. The town was back on the same street as before, with many lights shining below, but the light seemed somehow hotter than before. And the Milky Way he had just seen in his dream was again white and hazy, just as it had been before, and looked especially smoky above the pitch-black southern horizon, and to the right of it. The red star of Scorpio sparkled beautifully, and the position of the whole sky seemed not to have changed much. Giovanni ran down the hill in one go. His heart was filled with thoughts of his mother, who was still waiting for him and had not yet eaten dinner. He passed steadily through the black pine forest, and then rounded the pale white pasture fence, and came back out of the previous entrance and in front of the dark cowshed again. It seemed someone had just returned home, for there was a cart there that had not been there before, with 2 barrels of some kind on it. Good evening, Giovanni called. Yes, a person in wide white trousers came out immediately and stood up. What do you want? I didn't get any milk today. Oh, sorry. The man went straight to the back and brought a bottle of milk. He handed it to Giovanni and continued. I'm really sorry. It was too late today, and I accidentally left the fence open, so I went to the cow and drank about half of it. The man laughed. I see. I'll have it then. Yes, sorry. Giovanni held the still hot bottle in both hands and left the fence. He then passed through a town with trees for a while, came out onto the main road, and after a while the road became a cross. And on his right, at the end of the road, stood the tower of a large bridge over the river where Campanella and his friends had gone to float their lights, looming in the night sky. However, at the corner of the street or in front of a shop, about 7 or 8 women were gathered in groups, looking toward the bridge and whispering something. There were also many different lights on the bridge. For some reason, Giovanni felt a sudden cold in his heart. Then he suddenly called out to the people nearby, has something happened? A child fell into the water, one person said, and they all looked at Giovanni. Giovanni ran toward the bridge in a frenzy. The bridge was so crowded with people that he couldn't see the river. A police officer in a white uniform was also there. Giovanni jumped from the foot of the bridge and landed on the wide riverbank below. Many lights were busily going up and down along the river's edge. 7 or 8 fires were flickering in the dark on the opposite bank as well. In the middle of it all, the river, with no more light from the crows, flowed silently, a gray color, making a faint noise. At the very downstream end of the riverbank, where a sandbar-like area emerged, a group of people stood clearly black. Giovanni ran towards it. Suddenly, he met Marso, who had been with Campanella earlier. Marso ran up to Giovanni and said, Giovanni, Campanella went into the river. Why? When? Zanelli was trying to push a lantern from his boat toward the flowing water. Then the boat shook and he must have fallen in. Campanella jumped in right away. He pushed Zanella toward the boat. Zanelli was grabbed by Cato. But we can't see Campanella anymore. Everyone must be looking for him. Yes, everyone came right away. Campanella's father came too. But they couldn't find him. They took Zanella home. Giovanni went over to where everyone was. There, surrounded by students and townspeople, was Campanella's father, with his pale, pointed chin, wearing black clothes. Standing straight, holding his watch in his left hand, staring intently. Everyone was staring intently at the river too. No one said a word. Giovanni was so excited that his legs trembled. Many acetylene lamps used for catching fish were busily going back and forth, and he could see the black water of the river flickering and flowing with small waves. The Milky Way was reflected in the water downstream, filling the entire river, and it looked as if the sky was bare of water. Giovanni couldn't help but feel that Campanella was now only on the outskirts of that galaxy. But everyone else still seemed to be expecting that Campanella would emerge from somewhere between the waves saying, I've swam quite a distance, or that he had landed on some unknown island and was standing there waiting for someone to come. But suddenly Campanella's father said firmly, it's too late. It's been 45 minutes since he fell. Giovanni ran over to the doctor and stood in front of him. He tried to say, I know where Campanella went, I was walking with him, but his throat was choked and he couldn't say anything. The doctor then looked at Giovanni for a while, perhaps thinking that Giovanni had come to greet him, and then said politely, you must be Giovanni. Thank you very much for this evening. Giovanni could not say anything and simply bowed. Has your father returned home yet? The doctor asked again, still holding the watch tightly. No. Giovanni shook his head slightly. I wonder what's wrong. I heard very good news from him the day before yesterday. He should have arrived by today. The boat must have been delayed. Giovanni, please come over to my house with everyone tomorrow, after school." As he said this, the professor again gazed downstream, in the direction of the Milky Way. Giovanni's heart was already filled with so many things that he left the professor without a word. He ran again along the river towards the town, trying to quickly bring some milk to his mother and let her know that his father was coming home. That's that.